Hey class, Bob Greavy here. I'm going to walk you through how to solve the linear programming problem I assigned last week using Microsoft Excel's solver. So you see on the right I've got the problem up there for you, and the problem has two decision variables, x1 and x2. See those here and here. We're trying to maximize something. So maybe 14, for example, could be the profit from a product we're referring to with x1, and $22 could be the profit from a product we might refer to as x2. And x1 and x2 might represent the quantities of each that we'll produce respectively. So how do we maximize profit? That's one example of what this problem could represent. And then we have constraints. Perhaps it takes 4 hours to produce a product 1, 8 hours to produce a product 2, and we only have 40 hours of labor available. So this constraint says that the total labor you use, 4 times the number of product 1 you produce, plus 8 hours times the number of product 2 you produce, must be less than or equal to the amount of labor you have. Perhaps we've committed to produce at least 6 products. That's what this constraint would look like. The number of product 1 plus the number of product 2 must be at least 6. And maybe we have some other constraint that says you cannot produce more than 4 of product 2. So just an example of what this linear programming problem might represent. I wanted you to be able to solve one of these in Excel, in part because you'll do this extensively in another MBA course we have here, Econ 5213, which is basically management science and quantitative analysis. So we kind of introduce you to this in the context of making decisions or having a computer find optimal solutions. And then when you get to that class, it's not overwhelming because you've had a little bit of experience in this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to designate cells to serve as my decision variables. So I'm going to let my decision variables exist, or I'm going to designate cells B1 and B2. So I'm just going to color those cells yellow to remind me that B1 and B2 are my decision variables representing X1 and X2 respectively. So X1 and X2. So these are just labels. A1 and A2 I've typed labels. The actual decision variables will be in cells B1 and B2. And now all I've got to do is I've got to set up a cell representing my profit function. So I'll just type profit again. Cell A4 is a label. I want to put the profit function in cell B4. So I'm going to type equals, and I'm going to type this function. But instead of X1 and X2, I'm going to refer to cells B1 and B2. So that's going to equal 14 times B1 plus 22 times B2. And now I have my objective function within cell B4. Okay, I also need to have the left-hand side and right-hand side of my 3 constraints. I'm going to do that in cells A6 through cells B9, and I'll show you that here. So the left-hand side of the first constraint would look like this: equals 4 times B1, because B1 is X1 in this spreadsheet, plus 8 times B2. Now, I end it there, so I'm only typing the left-hand side of the constraint. I'm not typing less than or equal to. Okay, and I'm going to put the right-hand side of the constraint in the cell adjacent to it, and that'll make life real easy when I open Solver in a minute. So again, what I did was I typed the left-hand side, everything to the left of the less than or equal to, put that in one cell, and everything to the right of that in the cell to the right. Let's do that for the second constraint over here. Equals B1 plus B2, that's the left-hand side. I'm not worried about whether it's less than or greater than at this point. I'll just put the 6 over here. And now I'll just type equals B2, because that's X2. Enter, and then I'll put a 4 over here. Now what I'll be able to do is, just using Solver's interface, I'll be able to say that, for example, this cell must be less than or equal to this cell. It'll be real easy to set this up now. So I'm going to go to, come back. I'm going to go to the Data tab. At the end of the Data tab, I should have the solver over here. It looks like I need to install that on this machine. So I'll go to Home, or actually I'll come up here. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go to File. Hadn't done this in a while. File, Options, Add-ins. I'll click Add-ins. I see Excel add-ins down here. I'll click Go. I'll select that solver add-in button right there. I'll hit OK. And now, when I go to the Data tab, I'll see the solver over here. So if you missed that, hit the rewind button, and you'll see how to install solver as well. Okay, so now that I have solver installed, I'm going to use it. I'm going to click on solver, and I'll get the interface here. Your interface may look a little bit different if you have an older version of Excel, but this is what most of you will see. My objective function, the first thing I need to do is designate where my objective function is, and that is my profit function in cell B4. You can type B4 here, or you can just click in the cell, and now I have B4 in there. I do want to maximize it. Sometimes we want to minimize something, for example, costs, or sometimes we use this value of if we want to designate a very specific value, something not unlike what you did with the goal seek. Then by changing variable cells, these are my decision variables, so these are cells B1 and B2. You can type B1 colon B2. Those of you who don't use solver every day, the colon is how you designate a range of cells. So for example, if I wanted to designate cells A1 through B2, I'd say A1 colon B2, and I'd get all 4 of these cells. So you start with the upper left-hand cell and end with the lower right-hand cell. Okay, so B1 colon B2. The dollar signs designate absolute cell values, so if these were to be copied and pasted, it wouldn't affect the row or column references. Okay, now I need to add my constraints. Just come over here and hit Add. The first constraint is that this number here, which represents the 4x1 plus 8x2, must be less than or equal to, so there's my less than or equal to, so that's already correct by default. And now I could type the number 40 here, or I could just simply type that cell, or rather reference that cell. What you cannot do is you cannot enter the formula. You couldn't go in this field here and type equals 4 times B1 plus 8 times B2. You have to reference a cell if there's a formula. You can type a number. So if I didn't want to put B6 in there, I could type the number 40. It wouldn't make a difference. Okay, so I'll hit Add, and that added that constraint. Now I'm ready to add another one. The next constraint is x1 plus x2 greater than or equal to 6. So x1 plus x2 is right here. Again, can't type x1 plus x2. It must be greater than or equal to. And then I could type a 6 here, or I could reference the cell with the 6 in it. I'll hit Add. Now I'll get the next one, x2. I'm going to grab that cell here because that's where x2 is. I could also say b2 and get the same results. Must be less than or equal to. I could type 4. In fact, I will. I'll just put a 4 in there. And I'll click OK because this is the last constraint. If I had more constraints to go, I would click Add. But OK will take me back to the problem, and you see the entire problem is now set up. My objective function B4, I want to maximize it by changing my decision variables subject to these 3 constraints. This checkbox needs to be checked. Make sure that unconstrained variables are non-negative. That again tells the computer that B1 cannot be a -5, which seems ridiculous to anyone with common sense. How do you produce -5 products? But mathematically, the computer will think that, for example, producing -5 of x1 would perhaps create 20 hours of labor that could be then used by product 2, which of course that's not reality. So you always have this make unconstrained variables non-negative. You always have that checked. At this point I should be able to hit solve and see what happens. Okay, there's my solution. I'll hit keep my solver solution 10 and 0. So does this satisfy my constraints? First of all, it earns me $140 in profit. That should be no other way to make more money without violating one of the constraints. Now is 4x plus 8x2 less than or equal to 40? It is. It's equal to 40. Is this greater than 6? It is. Is this less than 4? It is. So all of my constraints are satisfied, and I've optimized or made the most money. So linear programming, to summarize, is a very powerful tool when the decision you're trying to make consists of many components, if you will. And those components are called decision variables. So it's not like a yes-no decision. It's a what should this equal, what should this equal, what should this equal, what should this equal. There's no limit to the number of decision variables you can include. So that's your tutorial. Now if I can figure out how to turn this recorder off, we'll be all done.